Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. In this video, we're going to be talking about some specific ETFs that are weekly pairs, and I want to talk to you about my process on picking these and why I'm actually using $1,000 free as a Robinhood Gold subscriber. Let's dive right in and we're going to get into it. So the first one here is REX. I'm sure you have seen this before. These ETFs I've used in a prior video, and I want to go ahead and talk about them right now. So these REX ETFs are leveraged, as you can see right here, and it is through NVIDIA. We can see my total position here. We can see my average cost and just how many shares I am owning. And remember, these are weekly paying, so the dividends will snowball quickly if we compound this. If we want to go ahead and scroll down to the very bottom, we can see some inception dates. We can also see the history of when I actually owned this and when I sold it and so forth. So let's dive right into this because there's a lot of them and I want to go through this quickly. Let's jump on to the next one right now. My next one is through REX, of course. It is TSII, which is Tesla. Of course, we can see my market value, my average cost, how many shares I own. And what's interesting about this is that some of these REX ETFs do not allow yet for fractional shares. I'm sure they'll open that up. I know for NVII, which is the NVIDIA one, there is fractional shares, but not for the Tesla one. So we'll see how that goes moving forward. Of course, we can read a little bit about it, when the inception date was, and of course the history behind this particular ETF. So again, we're going to go through this quickly because we have a lot to cover in this video. So let's move on to the next one right now. My next position here is through REX, COII, which is Coinbase. If you are unaware of that, go ahead and see the same thing, market value, average cost. We can see the price performance here. We'll talk about the price performance in a later video, but just to not make this so long for you all. And of course, we can read just a little bit about it. We can see, of course, the history when I used to own these, sold it, and of course, all of that wonderful information. Again, I'm using REX for all of the single ETF stocks, which I like it because the underlying companies are good. Jump on to the next one right now. So this is a new one that I actually discovered a few weeks ago. This is a Global X Bitcoin covered call ETF. Of course, these all pay weekly, which is nice. So I like to get that monthly income up nice and high. And of course, these are weekly, so they're compounding quicker than a monthly, total, something like a QQQI or SPYI, which is why I like exploring this. Of course, you can read about it here real quick. The expense ratio is not too bad. And of course, you can see the history right here of when I actually bought it, which was 11 hours ago. So let's jump back into the next one because we have to go through this quickly. So my next one here is BLOX. Of course, you can see my total market price here, my average share cost, and of course how many shares I own. And of course, this is a cryptocurrency. If you're unfamiliar with it, it is actually dealing with all of the crypto companies. You can read it right there. Ethereum, Bitcoin, Robinhood, Coinbase, all that, Ethereum, this is where your fund is going to be at. The only downside I would say to this is actually the expense ratio. It's just a little expensive, but the dividend is so nice on this, and we'll show you that in just a moment. But let's jump on to the next one right now. My last one here is through Roundhill. It is the Magnificent Seven. And of course, this is the reason why I actually like this, because it's a weekly pair. It's for Mag 7. And of course, we can see the price performance on this hasn't been too bad. We can look at the year to date, a little up at 7%. So we'll talk about price performance in another video. But the point is that these are all weekly pairs and they are all underlying companies that are profitable and that are good and that we could trust for long-term wealth building. And of course, if you want to read a little bit about it, you can go ahead and read it right there. And you can see the inception date wasn't too long ago, on April 22nd, 2025. And of course, we can see just how much they are actually under the AUM, which is a little over 106 million. Of course, we can see my purchase right there. So now I want to dive into Seeking Alpha, and that's really where we're going to talk about the actual amounts we're getting paid for each ETF. Let's jump into that right now. Now that we are in Seeking Alpha, we can see the actual price per share, of course, and we can see the dividend history. Of course, I always like to go to the max time frame. We can see exactly the amounts that they were paying per share. So 21 cents, 20 cents, 24 cents, and of course 55 cents back here on the 2nd of September. What I'd like to see is that the consistent amount of dividends has not been lowering. Actually, it's been increasing. When we actually started this fund back here on the 6th, we were around 26 cents, 11 cents, and it's kind of fluctuated, but there have been some very big payouts on this. And I like to see that, especially for something like Nvidia. This is what the underlying stock is on that. And of course, we can come to the very bottom. We can see it at a glance here, and we can see every single dividend that has been paid. And of course, we can see the frequency is weekly, which is really nice to see. And of course, we can see where people are going to rate this. It's such a new fund. There's actually not too much information on this. I would like to see something right here, but unfortunately, there's nothing. One thing to mention here, though, that I do like about Seeking Alpha is we can actually see what that dividend yield is at 11.75%. And we can see what they're estimating what per share would be $3.68. And of course, what's really nice is we can just dive right into the next ones right here. So let's go on to TSII right now. Now that we're on TSII, of course, that is Tesla. And what I like to do is come to dividends right here, come to dividend history. And of course, I like to do max right there. And we can see just the amounts that we're getting paid. We can see quite high 30 cents, 24 cents, and some of the lower amounts right here, because of course, remember, the underlying stock was not performing too well in August. That was some of the lows of Tesla that I have ever seen. So it's nice to see that the stock is actually rebounding. And of course, this is feeding off of the volatility. So that amount has continued to increase. And of course, their weekly pain right here, we can see the frequency and we can see the amount right there. Let's come up to this right here, because this is what I like to see. Dividend yield is almost 10%. And we can see exactly how much we're going to be getting paid, $2.79. And we can see when the last amount was actually paid, which was paid back on the 24th of September. Let's jump on to the next one right now. Of course, the next one is COII, which is through Rex. And of course, the underlying stock is Coinbase. Come here to dividends. And then of course, let's just jump ahead and go to the history, because this is what I like to see first. And then we'll talk about a few more things. So we can see the amounts have actually been pretty low for August and September, but that's okay. As long as it's consistent, that's what I like to see. We can actually see that the lowest amount was actually 11 cents there, but that's okay. And we can see that the other higher amounts were 58 cents, 39 cents, 76 cents, 29 cents. And remember, this is performing with the stock. Of course, the price performance is where this is actually mattering. So we can come here to the dividend score. This is what the most impressive is, I would say, is that 19.58% dividend yield. That is insane. And then we can also see per share, it's paying out $4.44. Now, if we come in here and look at the summary, right, we can actually see the performance of the stock. We had it balloon up here in July 17th at around $34.82 a share. And of course, it has been kind of flat because the underlying stock has significantly changed. That is what's going on with that. But of course, the dividends, it has been doing well. And I do like to see that it continues to perform well. Let's jump on to the next one right now. So my next one here is the BCCC, which is the Global X Bitcoin Covered Call. So what I like to see, of course, is the amount that's getting paid. We can see the amounts are actually a little bit higher and more significant in the sense of when these are actually hitting. So we can see the share right there, which is $24.08. We can see the amounts, 17 cents, 19 cents, 21 cents, and so forth. As we go back here, we can see it's been pretty consistent. It has not missed. What I like to see, of course, it is a weekly paying. So we can see exactly the amounts that we're getting paid right there. These are so new. So, we're going to have to just keep track if these yields change. Of course, let's go to the dividend score. Dividend yield right there is 11.58%. We can see the amount is $2.79, which isn't too bad. Of course, remember, these are all new and subject to change. Let's jump on to the next one right now. So my next one here is the BLOX, which is the crypto income ETF. And of course, we can see the amounts have been quite high. Again, similar to the BCCC, which is around 16 to 15 cents per share. And of course, we're getting paid out weekly, and this is on Mondays. So it's nice to get paid at the beginning of the week. And we can see it right there. It has continued to pay out very nicely. Of course, frequency is weekly right there, and we can see the amounts right there, which aren't too bad. Of course, let's go over here. The dividend yield is actually lower on this. It's at 7.91%, and we can see it's been paying $1.82. So again, not too bad, but it's the amount is what matters. We continue to get paid every single week. And if we compound that, we can see that snowball effect. And let's jump onto the next stock right now. So my next one here is through Roundhill, and it's the Magnificent Seven. And of course, we can see the amounts that has been paying out has been quite substantial for the amounts. 38 cents, 38 cents. And we can see, remember, these are weekly paying, right? and we can see as high back here was 48 cents right around the inception. So that's to note here. Of course, we can see the amounts here and we can see when exactly those amounts were. Now let's go to the dividend score card. And of course, I like to see this. Look at that, 12.86%, which is nice to see. And then the amount, $7.27. Not too bad. And we can see the last amount right there was paid out at 38 cents. So overall, I'd like to see this. It's something that I think it's worth adding. So now what I want to do is go ahead and look at the performance of all of these in a really cool website I would recommend checking out. Let's jump into that right now. All right, we are now back in stock analysis. And of course, I'm sure you're familiar with this website from a lot of my other videos. And what I love about this particular website is we can plug in all of the data here and we can look at exactly what is performing the best. As we look at our max time frame, of course, these haven't been around that long. We can see that the actual leader here is actually TSII, and remember that is Tesla. And of course, we can see the other bottom performers here, unfortunately, is the Bitcoin, because, you know, Bitcoin hasn't really been doing too much in the fact of price performance. We'll talk about that in another video, but overall, we can see Tesla, Nvidia, BLOX, which is, remember, cryptocurrencies and crypto companies, and of course, the Mag 7 right there, and COIII, and of course, BCCC, which are the companies that I actually am watching the closest, because those are the ones that are going to have the biggest moves as we head into winter time. Crypto always moves around those time frames. So we can see overall Tesla is leading the pack here, but it has changed, as we can see, depending on the time of year and when this was, because remember, we're in September, right? When we were back here in the peaks, it was a little different. Tesla was actually at the bottom and Coinbase was at the very top. Now we can actually scroll down to the very bottom here. What I really like is that it actually labels everything in color coordination. Basically, since max time frame, Nvidia has been the best performing one. No shock there. And of course, the second one is Tesla. And of course, next one is BLOX. And we have the Mag 7 right there, which of course, all these companies are pretty much in the Mag 7. Here's the other thing that I like to look at here is we can look at performance. We can see exactly where the performance has been within 1 month. Remember, these things haven't even been around for 6 months, but just based off of the 1 month return here, we can see that Tesla is leading the pack. And of course, the other one was BLOX, and of course, Mag 7. That's what I like to see. Here is the price. And of course, the profile names and dividend yields. This is what I was saying, right? Weekly pain. Of course, we can see all of the dividend yields. And look at that big one. Coinbase is so high right there. And of course, Nvidia and BCCC, which is Bitcoin, and the Mag 7 right there. Now, remember, these are all ETFs, so there's really no financials. There's just AUMs, and it's not going to show us that at the moment here. But the point being is that I love to see everything that these companies are doing. And the other thing that I like to look at here is you can actually compare some of the other big ones. You can actually compare the individual stocks, which is what I like to do. It helps to look at the long-term frame of this. And of course, if we look at all, you know, we can see exactly who is the leader here. And the leader here is still Nvidia, which is no surprise there because they have been crushing it overall in the actual stock. I hope this video helped all of you out. Let me know if you have any more questions, and I will definitely document this $1,000 worth of margin that I'm using for free on Robinhood, and I will let you all know how it goes. As always, thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.